wanted to ask you about was about looking at kind of traditional career paths or ladders versus exploring other opportunities and people who have found kind of different, both strengths, weaknesses, dark sides, or maybe part of their personality that they can use in a different way, right? Because generally a lot of people are taught, whether it's in school or university or whatever, that there's one specific high potential career path, and that's management and leadership, right? And that's climbing a certain level of rungs in the ladder until you own or run a company, and however you get there, that's kind of the pinnacle. But that's really not true. And that's not true for most people who that's not where they're going to be most successful, most effective, most happy, most productive, most whatever they want to get from work for their life. So do you find people learn that at different stages of life, or how do people go about discovering what they really, where they fit best or what they want to be doing?
Oh gosh. Well, it might sound so trite, but I feel like this understanding often comes after after a dark night of the soul of sorts, right? Um, so the late psychologist William James, who he was considered the father of American psychology, believed that there are two types of people in the world. He believed there are once born souls and twice born souls. And the once born souls are those among us who are just pleased with the status quo. We're okay with ourselves. We're generally okay with the world. We view things sort of glass half full. We don't care too much about looking at our own flaws or imperfections or the flaws and imperfections in the world around us. And as a result of this fineness, we don't tend to struggle, or the once born souls don't tend to struggle a lot with their um, sort of psychological health, their physiological health, or these existential dilemmas, because things are just fine. The twice born souls, on the other hand, are those who, he said, look at the world as a double storied mystery. They're acutely aware of everything that is wrong with themselves and the world around them. And they have this just yearning, this urging, this craving to make meaning of it, or to heal it, or to help it, or to change it, or to fix it. And as a result of this awareness and this willingness to understand the gap between the current state of being and the desired state of being, these twice born souls often experience psychological and physiological illness, but they are also those with most of a destiny, he said. And he considered himself one of these twice born souls because they are those who are going to feel compelled to kind of turn themselves inside out, to do something that truly changes the world. And so, in this sense, I feel like a lot of people who go on this non traditional career path or who explore these different paths of being are the twice born souls, because and there's not one, it's not that one is better or worse, because frankly life is a lot easier as the once born soul, because you're just not as wrapped up in all of these ifs and shoulds buts coulds would shoulds of the world. But I have absolutely, using my own story as an example, I've always kind of identified as this twice born soul type character. But for much of my career, I was very set on following the prescribed path of success. So a few years ago, I found myself as a young woman working in venture capital, working with all men, on a path to sure success, fancy titles, all of that. And I crashed myself into my own dark night of the soul because I found myself rubbing up against these uncomfortable questions as a twice born soul of, am I living up to my potential? Am I doing the most that I can to impact the world? Do I really understand who I am? And the answers to those questions were no. And so I went on a few years of really uncomfortable, kind of self-inflicted shadow work to uncover these latent and untapped parts of my personality, because I had always thought that I was intelligent, that I was rational and practical and stoic and tough and all of these things. I didn't want to associate really with being sensitive or creative or flowy or feminine or receptive or patient or empathetic. I really almost had no interest in being those things because I didn't view those as successful qualities. I viewed them as liabilities. But as I began to do this shadow work and I began to peel back the layers that really thick, sturdy layers that I had built up over a few decades, I realized that actually my nature is all of these parts of myself that I thought was my shadow that I had been resisting. And as I began to lean into my eccentricities and my peccadillos and my quirks, I ended up uncovering this vast well of creativity and openness and empathy and intuition and all of these qualities that, without sort of running into that dark night of the soul, without being conflicted and confronted with these uncomfortable questions, I wouldn't have been forced to, kind of unplug the, or really leash, in a sense, those qualities that ended up being my greatest strengths and have led me on the unconventional path that I feel is my soul's work, right? Is my great work in the world. And that's led to starting my own company and writing a book and so on and so forth. And so that's a very long and maybe convoluted way of saying that if you are listening to this and you resonate with that idea of being a twice-born soul, maybe lean into that process of positive disintegration, right? Lean into that process of undergoing the psychic stress and the inner turmoil so that you can crack open these latent parts of yourself that are actually guiding you where you want to and need to go, right? It's actually in the shadows that I found my great work. And trust me, I never thought that that was going to be the case.
Yeah, it's funny because I think that happens for a lot of different people at different stages in life or career ages. And just the way you talk about that is really interesting because it just makes me think about how when something that looks like career progression, because other people are telling you this is what you should do, this is what success is, you can progress really far along that line, but sometimes it's a dead end for personal progression, right? Like if you are really good at something, you'll get way more of that work. You can do it again and again, 20 hours a day if you had the capacity to do it. But it's not really helping you out in any other ways for your mental health or your well-being or other things that are important in your life. I've had those kind of situations too, where you're working on a project or in a job and you just think, I would get as much of this work as I wanted to, but it's not the work I want to be doing for the rest of my life. It's not, I don't want to be managing other people doing this work. So it's funny to see that and looking at kind of areas for growth and development and learning about yourself, especially of like what you really want to do, where you want to be, who you want to be around. And sometimes the ability to make those choices, because I think a lot of people do that. And I've done that before where you just think, this is what I have to do. And this is the direction you have to go in to be successful. And when you're in that mindset and other people are reinforcing that around you, it definitely feels like that. But if you can break out of it, all of a sudden you realize, oh, look, I can go left instead of right. It's fine.
I mean, that's the kind of sick thing about it, right? Like, I have never been more celebrated or praised than I was when I was on a path that was incorrect for me. I've also never been told that I seemed happier or healthier than in the times of my life when I was, sick and depressed. It's interesting how there can be such a distorted view of what we think success looks like, or what other people think success looks like. And so I think um, the first step in this is really examining what that is and why I thought that being, a tough boss lady in venture capital with no emotion and who is just competing her way to success was actually that was actually the right path for me. I mean, now it sounds so silly, just even saying it out loud. But now that I've softened into these parts of myself that I used to think were only shadows, things like sensitivity, things like empathy, things like my desire for meaning and purpose in the world, I can't imagine being any other way. And I want nothing more for everyone else to know what that feels like. So.
Yeah, and it's funny when you learn something that you're supposed to learn, but it actually teaches you the opposite of what the lesson was supposed to be. Of going, okay, well, this is not what I want to be doing. This is not for me. But sometimes it's just funny how we end up getting there.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's so much of work, and it's so much of life in general. It's just as valuable, if not more valuable, to figure out what you don't want to do or who you don't want to be, as it is figuring out what you do want to do, what you do want to be, and having the courage to say, I don't want to be this anymore. and that's okay. And
Yeah.
holding space for the contradiction, right? It's the quote, do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. Large, I contain multitudes, and containing multitudes is great. I think that's all women.
Yeah, I don't think I could think of a better way to wrap that up. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.